And so it's my pleasure to introduce Hal Wynn, who is a program manager at APS China, who we've been hearing quite a bit about, doing incredible work on anti-human trafficking. And then Hal is the moderator for this panel, and she and the panelists will introduce themselves. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a great lunch and learned a lot so far and already feel inspired to put into action. Today, I feel very honored to be here with these three experts in human trafficking work. We're going to discuss about ways that we can protect vulnerable population who is at higher risk of human trafficking. And here with me today, first is Senator Rebecca, who is the state senator who represents the 37th district.
37!
The 37, yes. And we also have Caroline, who is the founding mother of Indigenous and Murdered Native Women. Next is we have my very dear co-founding mother of Asian Pacific Islander Women and Family Safety Center. I will hand my mic to them so that they can introduce more about their scope of work.
So Rebecca Saldana, Gomez-Shive, nice to see you all. And in the Senate, where my scope of work has been primarily is around making sure that workers who have historically been undervalued, made invisible, and not included, to include them into worker protections and safety. And that has included work around domestic workers, has been making sure that trafficked individuals have access to services regardless of their status, and making sure that we are, again, regardless of status, that people have access to their rights, to dignity and respect of their work and of who they are as human beings. So it's great to meet with you. Look forward to talking with you.
Good day, my name is Carolyn DeFord. I'm a member of the Puyallup tribe. I currently work and reside in the Tacoma, Washington area. I work for the Puyallup Tribe of Indians Community Domestic Violence Advocacy Program as their anti-trafficking program manager and MMIWP advocate. So I support our program goals to address violence in our tribal communities for our urban and reservation relatives. Our primary goal is to address domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking, gender-based violence. But through that, I'm also a family member of a long-term missing person. And when my mother went missing 25 years ago, I started kind of organically advocating for other families of missing people. And I started seeing the connection to our relatives who were going missing to domestic violence, and seeing the connection to trafficking and exploitation, all of the intersections that make our folks vulnerable, and that kind of just propelled me into the work that I do now. In 2016, I organized and created Missing and Murdered Native Americans for a small grassroots family member-led social media organization. We do outreach, education, and support services and direct services for families of missing with very limited resources. Mostly it's just being there, being a listening ear during one of the hardest times in their life, and connecting them to people in their local area who may be able to help them with boots on the ground or searches and support. My grandmother, a mother, and I'm honored to be here today and share space with everybody. Thank you for having me. Woo!
Hi, good afternoon, magandang hapon, Tagalog.
Again, I'm Emma Katagi, one of the founding mother of API Safety Center, now API Chaya. And just to say that the reason why we created API Safety Center is because at that time, there is no other organization that served our population that is culturally and linguistically relevant. And so I'm just happy that they still exist and they're going to about 30 years now. Right now, my job, well, I wear so many hats. I think I wear every one of them. Could be advocate, organizer, consultant. So now I'm a consultant of City of Seattle. We got funded to serve vulnerable population, especially those smaller community that have no representation in terms of gender-based violence. And I just want to shout out, I know we have some Cambodian here, that's one of the group that I have. Ecuadorian, I work with Casa Latina, and at some point Mother Nation, and also Filipino community, and there's other community that I worked in the past. Reason is because we would like to, develop leaders within the community, and that they can step up and they can create their own community organization that serve their population in a more appropriate way. So I think that's all.
Thank you so much for your introduction. Before we go into the question, I would like to share that I have been working, providing services to labor foreign-born survivors for 16 years, and what I see is the number of survivors keep increasing every year. The problem seems to get bigger and bigger every year. And I want to ask the panelists, what are the primary vulnerabilities that increase the risk of human trafficking among at-risk population in the United States or in Washington State? Anyone feel like you want to answer the question? I can ask the question again. What are the primary vulnerabilities that increase the risk of human trafficking among at-risk population in our country or in Washington State?
It's on.
Well, I think for me, I've been doing this work for the longest time. Usually, we work with vulnerable population, and some of them is, newly immigrant. When they come into the state, they have no idea what's going on. Foreign national, especially because a lot of times when they come in here, all their documents get taken out, and they really get stuck in the community, in their home. Limited English speaking, that's a lot. That's because when they don't know the language, they have a hard time to actually go outside because they might not be able to read the sign. They don't know how to get the bus and all of that. A lot of it also is about family. We work with a lot of this victims that they come in by themselves, so we become the family. And so we have the responsibility to make sure that we can provide them the support, the appropriate one, and then that way they can be feeling comfortable in here. Some of them they don't have status, undocumented, or they come in here as a working visa, and after that expired, they become undocumented. And so, then I think a lot of them they face a worse condition because once they get out the status, then they become very vulnerable. They will take all kinds of things. So I know this because even for us, when we have the people who work as a caregiver, a lot of them, those are one of the vulnerable population that get into some incidents and they can get out.
I just want to add a little bit to that, because a lot of our vulnerabilities are universal, right? But working in Indian country, we face some unique vulnerabilities that a lot of other areas don't have. We have some jurisdictional challenges. We're unable to prosecute non-natives who commit crimes on the reservation. Some of our tribes are different. They have different jurisdiction. They may be appealed to a tribe or they're cross-commissioned or something like that, but it just adds to that confusion. There's so many different types of jurisdiction, and what that creates is kind of a free-for-all for criminals who know that the prosecution rate on reservations is low. And if it's your business to be able to commit crime and get away with it, the reservation is the perfect place to do that. It also creates what the film Sister Rising quoted called as safe victims, because they're unprosecutable. So this jurisdiction gap creates a perception that Native women on the reservation are safe to rape, safe to murder, safe to harm, because the prosecution rate again is so low, and many of our reservations don't have the logistics, the resources, and the funding to be able to go through the process to get special tribal criminal jurisdiction, which is kind of a fix that the government put in place to allow tribes to exercise jurisdiction over non-natives on the reservation for specific crimes. Some of those crimes were domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, and now human trafficking. So the process to get that jurisdiction is very lengthy, very expensive, and we just need a whole fix. We need to be able to prosecute people who commit crimes within our reservation boundaries. If you go to another country, you don't commit a crime, you can walk back across, go home with no consequences, but when you're on the reservation, likely you do. We also, a lot of our reservations have a lack of resources. They may have to travel an hour into town to get services. It's an example, if you receive services in the Puyallup Reservation, or you were victimized on the Puyallup Reservation, we're such a tight-knit, close family community. Everybody's related and everybody knows everybody. You might not want to go to the domestic violence program to get DV services because Angie across the street is going to see you walk in there and she's going to want to know what's up. Pretty soon, everybody knows what's going on. So, having access to services where they can be guaranteed confidentiality, not have to drive an hour away. We also have just the high rates of vulnerabilities that were created by building new policy that we still deal with. Part of that being those jurisdiction challenges, but the lack of resources, the lack of funding to support our programs. And, like everything everybody else has started to homelessness, substance use, mental health, and lack of services and funding for those, or adequate services for those. We may send some of our tribal relatives to treatment over 7 times. And so we don't have adequate and effective services, but also the high rates of foster care. That link between foster care and exploitation or being targeted, and we have extremely high rates of youth in care. And it just, sometimes with poverty, all of these social issues kind of just fuel this lack of hope that any of us are always looking for something better, for a better life, more opportunity, to be happy and loved.
I feel like those of us that have been here most of the day, some of the earlier panels have really spoke to what are the root causes and what causes for vulnerability in Washington State. The fact that we are one of the highest growing economies is agriculture. Our ports depend and cultivate exports, right, and imports, but we don't necessarily provide protections for the workforce that is being compelled to do that work. Or that are doing the work that we are depending on for cheaper imports. So I think those are all factors that we've heard from earlier and look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much. And the next question that I have is, how can we as community and organization can better identify and support individuals at risk of human trafficking before they become victims.
So I think part of it, what we can do is make sure that we as consumers, we as service providers, as doctors, as policymakers are recognizing our complicity and taking responsibility to be educated and informed and active. And that is about knowing where our food comes from, what the conditions of the workplace was, knowing and knowing what our rights are, and making sure that we are being as informed as we can. I think that's one of the first pieces of legislation I partnered with the Women's Center and former Representative Elena Valoria is on looking at our supply chain and accountability. And I think the challenge is that no one wants to actually be the one to be held accountable. And none of us want to really face what it takes to look under the floorboards, right? In terms of what our country and our democracy is formed on. It is on first taking land, the way it displaces people, which we know when people are displaced, that creates a higher vulnerability and more desperation for having to try to figure out how to get resources. The other is around exploitative labor. And those are fundamental root causes of why we still have trafficking today. Because we haven't really faced that as a country, and we haven't really addressed it, and our economy has not taken into account those things and made sure that we are paying it forward. So I think that's the first piece, and the other is just about education and connection, because I think isolation is the other thing. When people feel that have traumas that they're experiencing and they're isolated, that is also what keeps people in the system. And so everything that we can do to build connection, community, no wrongdoer, and those, I think that's the other piece that I think is really important when we think about policy, but also when we just think about our community and how we do our work from whatever sphere, wherever we are in the sphere of influence.
This is a really good question. I kind of put a little bit of thought into it because I think some of it we do naturally already. We kind of don't realize that, at least in our community, that it's part of our culture. It's part of our protective factor. What makes our communities and our cultures tribal culture so beautiful. But the thing that kind of stood out to me in my thought process as we were talking today through the other presenters was, healthy relationship training. It's not cool to have healthy relationship training, but the means that over-sexualize women, those are cool. So kind of just changing our perspective, our social culture, I guess, what's acceptable, addressing rape culture, the over-sexualization, making it cool to talk about it. That it's safe to talk about some of these issues and how they face our community. And economic empowerment, providing opportunities for people to earn a living wage where they're not facing desperation to keep a roof over their head and food on the table and to feed their children within access to their tribal community. If I want to make a living wage, I've got to work 2 jobs. I can't be aware of what's going on with my children fully if I'm overworked and under-resourced. So that economic development and empowering our folks to not have to act out of desperation. And in the healthcare piece this morning, we talked about vulnerabilities and exacerbating those vulnerabilities, that climate change exacerbates vulnerabilities. In Indian country, a lot of our communities are faced with challenges around keeping and claiming our land, our natural resources, and our sovereignty. And so that, being able to exercise our sovereignty reduces those barriers to those vulnerabilities. And so I was just thinking, how do we prepare for that? How do we prepare for our vulnerabilities and that exasperation of vulnerability? And I think, whatever intersection we're looking at or working with in training, it would be, whether we're working with our homelessness community or our substance use workers or law enforcement, getting particular training in there for them. I was just at a treatment center maybe 11 months ago, and I asked about their anti-trafficking training, and she was like, what? I said, do you do trafficking training? And she said, well, when we do our orientation, our patients know that there's a bus stop out on the corner, and if they need, we'll transport with Uber and Lyft, and that's me.
She's not traffic.
Traffic,
Yeah.
trafficking, we're two different things. So that they know how many of our folks are in treatment or been in treatment, and they're not getting treatment tailored to their needs, we're throwing money away. And the hope, for them, and they've gone through this big step of getting services for 30 days and failed because the treatment wasn't effective and efficient and tailored to them. And so now I'm a failure because I couldn't maintain, I didn't have the tools to maintain my recovery or the community to do it in. And I have to go back, but I failed the first time, and my family's disappointed, and the shame that falls along with the relapse, so it doesn't have to be that way.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I know that now we're talking about other community, but it is similar. Everything is happening similar to happening in the Native American community also. So for me, because I work with a lot of API community, and a lot of them, some of them, is actually didn't have access to anything at all, because one, they don't know that there is resources available, and they don't know how to access to that. So for me, one of the things that we do is we call it natural helper model, and what we do is we do community education, awareness, organizing, mobilization. Those are the buzzword, but really it's the same. Our goal is to really just to go to the community, develop relationship with the community. We don't go to the community. I don't go to the community and tell them what to do. I go in there and ask, what are your needs? And then once I figure out what they need, and then my own agenda in terms of providing education awareness will be on their agenda. So the other thing also is we need translated material, but again, not just material that's translated, because some community also, they don't have language. So this one is another thing that is so important, because if they see it, everybody can identify what it means. The other thing also is because we've been doing this work, it's a word of mouth. So some of the survivors that we work with, they become our resources that actually spread the word. And those are very important for us. The other thing is we want to make sure that we want to work with the community, not telling them, what to do, because they are the best resources that also knows what their needs are. Sometimes, we go to the community and we feel that we know what they need, and we demand, this is what we want to do. We need to get back and say, okay, because if we are working for veterans or current education about gender-based violence, that may not be their priority. So we need to look at what are the things, as say, it has to be a holistic approach. We cannot just have it silo. We know this when we provide services to the victim. We always say, oh, you go to that housing. We talk to them. Oh, you go to that clinic. And a lot of times, the victim or survivor, they don't know the process. And then, when they get there, they get feel it's happening, especially at Social Security office, there's a chance. I've seen this so many times. So we want to make sure that we work with them, we guide them, if we need to go with them, so that they are able to understand the whole process, and so be it. I think sometimes we need to be passionate and, committed to what we do. We can't just do it as this is part of your job, 9 to 5 job. Once you develop those relationships, then you can make them, you can develop their leadership skill and they can step up because they are the one, the most advocate, that can advocate for the community. And we just need to sort of, support them in a different way. And, we work with the legislation. No, we always do all kinds of things because we feel that is part of that. And as you said, our job description doesn't say what are we supposed to do. We just do what we feel is good for the community and what the needs of the community. Language, and then also I think that for the respect. We need to make sure that we respect the community that we serve, and then that way, we can develop a better relationship and we can create a better policy. We need to get them involved in the policy level also because they're the one that really being impacted.
Thank you so much. And I second with Emma that language access, one of the vulnerabilities that Emma named earlier is the barrier of language in many survivors that we serve. And I am very surprised to see until today, regardless of how diverse our states are, there are still many agency and service providers still don't have the protocol to provide proper language access. And in order to provide education or services to foreign-born survivors. And that actually a very serious issue in order for us to do client-centered or trauma-informed services to our client. And without having proper language access, people can't even know what's available out there for them to seek services. Thank you so much for naming that. The next question that I have is, what are the gaps that you see in our current state or federal policy that needed to be addressed to provide better protection to our at-risk population? Maybe this is a question for Senator Rebecca. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, I think one of the things that I hear also is of the gaps of jurisdiction. And I think in Washington State, there's a few things that we still need to do, quite a few. One is, again, we have, Jessica talking about the Bill of Rights for domestic workers in Washington, in the city of Seattle. We have not passed that policy at the state level. And when we introduced it a few years back, we had a lot of pushback because all of these employers were families. Right, and they all think that the nanny, the au pair, the domestic worker they treat her like their family, So how could there be expectation? And even in the face of really, at the time there was an article, the Seattle Times did a piece on one of the women that was brave enough to testify about how she was, her documents were taken. And she was told that she was supposed to clean naked, undressed. And when she, refused these were the things that she was experiencing. And yes, I would like to say that most families and employers are doing the best they can, but the reality is the conditions are set where their employment is based on their status. It is, in these very informal settings where there's a power dynamic, and so we need to pass the Domestic Worker Bills of Rights, and the coalition is, meeting with us now to set that agenda. We need support, we need voices, and a strong coalition to be able to get that passed. We have worked in Washington State to put in law that this, regardless of status, you cannot be discriminated against in your workplace. But the difference and where the gap is making sure that we have resources and funding, not just at the Office of Labor Standards at the city level, but statewide, to be able to have culturally competent communication and education about what people's rights are, how they can enforce them, and making sure that they're going to be protected when they are brave enough to speak out. And the other piece, that we were talking about, right, is that yes, there's corporate accountability that we need, and that piece of legislation should be reintroduced and moved forward. But often it is on a really small level, where it's our own communities, right, that have been here. They bring their family, they bring someone else from their hometown, and people are desperate, and they as small businesses may or may not really know what their responsibilities are, right? And they don't have the resources, even if they want to pay the living wage. They don't necessarily have the resources because there's been so much downward pressure and so much. And so I think that's a piece where it's both education, not just to the workforce, but to the employers, about how if they are going to take on the responsibility of being an owner, of being an employer, what their responsibilities are, how do we help them get there, and so that we can prevent these kinds of cases where there is street exploitation. I think that there's more, but I think the other piece that I'll just say from my perspective, because there was a really thoughtful question earlier today about the federal delegation or broken immigration system. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm so thankful for all of you that do direct service and social work. Thank you. My whole career has been under a broken immigration system. And it's heartbreaking to have farm workers rally year after year and have our immigration marches every May Day to have nothing changed for so long. That I will say that my immigration attorney friend, did say in her whole career, we're the same age, of working as an attorney, that over the last few years has been better. And because there is more enforcement and opportunities to use, if a worker is organizing and they, are for traffic, or they're speaking up for the rights and they're retaliated against, there are ways now for pathways to citizenship for them. Right. And I know that there's been much more openness to actually look at those cases more critically under this particular administration. So there are glimpses of hope, I guess, but that shouldn't be the standard, right? And so I think for us in Washington State, one of my purposes of it is making sure that they're not as vulnerable and making sure that workers, regardless of their status, have access to unemployment insurance. And that is our big lift in legislation that I've now introduced for a few years. And is making sure that we have an unemployment insurance that's run by the state to fill in the gap. Because a lot of times when people get vulnerable or these issues happen, it's because they just are desperate for any hour that can be counted towards work, and they don't want to offload. So it's up to us to be able to change the dynamic so that they don't have to be in that precarious situation.
Anybody else want to add about the gaps in policy?
I think one of the things that we see, like in my community and a lot of the folks that we serve, is that policies are being made without much, I know there's thought, but we're not necessarily reducing the impact, the negative impact that some of those policies are going to have on our most vulnerable, on people who don't get invited to the table to provide feedback or share their experiences and what's worked for them. And when that change rolls out, when these policies roll out, they affect our most vulnerable. For example, there was a policy a couple years ago, de-escalation, and law enforcement would respond to a protection order violation because they couldn't see in the window of the vehicle on camera. And there were witnesses besides the victim to say that it was done. And it wasn't. So law enforcement left and said, call him out when he does something. So now the victim is stuck there without the person being removed and terrified and just told to call us back when he does something. There was already a protection order. No, these are two same family, different situation. They didn't have the original protection order, they said falls back and does something, got the protection order and violated again, and you keep them to be picked up because the camera didn't pick up in the vehicle. So just, you know, some of those things are just frustrating as far as how policy or laws are interpreted as they trickle down. But one of the things that I think policy could really help us with, and we've seen some huge momentum last year, but in how we provide aftercare for survivors, and not just meeting like short-term needs, but it's not a 3 months or even a 1 year recovery. For many, it's a lifetime of recovery and building their strengths and confidence and support systems and resources, and getting to a point where you can put a roof over your head and not have to wonder or worry about what you're going to have to do next to make ends meet. Yeah, the long-term care, healing, and those support services that are going to need even 3 years, 5 years, 6 years down the road. We, you know, and the policies within the service providers to be able to provide that. We were working with somebody a couple years ago in the program that we were trying to refer to when only served this client if they had been trafficked within the year. So we kind of struggled to get services for them.
I think another thing also that I think we need to do is to really create another policy. If we say that we need to make sure that we talk about it seriously and have community survivor be involved in that, to make sure that we create so many policy already, and we know that because we always try to figure out, because we always miss something out of it. One thing that me and Donna, and Donna always, we need to do this. Then when we talk about wait staff, we thought that wait staff could be included as part of trafficking, and nobody even thought about it. Wait staff. Yeah. And so we are working on that to make sure that it could be included, that victim of trafficking can be included on the background. And I don't know if the state has it, city, we've been working on that, and I think helping stuff. I just want to put that out because we've been working on that since the last 2 years. I think we need to continue and expand educating the law enforcement. Because there's a lot of turnover of the law enforcement and in some county, they don't have any idea what is going on. Court, judges, everybody has to be in the same page. I know in the past we used to go to, because we've been so creative at API Safety Center that we thought, we need to go to the medical field because they're the first entry point. When a victim needs medical attention, they go to the emergency or clinic. And a lot of us are medical workers, they probably don't have any idea. So we have to tell them that if they come, sometimes it's a survivor, victim. The person, because they don't speak English, they're limited English speaking, who do they go with? The trafficker. The trafficker is the one that brings them there and who speaks. The trafficker. So the victim cannot express what is wrong with you. So we usually tell them, whoever, said, when they come to you, don't allow anyone go to, to really talk to them. Because they said, this doesn't speak English. I'm the person that knows more. And so we need to figure out a way how to be true, even the community. Oftentimes, we go to the community with attitude. I'm an expert. I will tell them. I will not conduct a meeting with the community and basically say, we're here because we need you guys to know it. Well, no. Oftentimes, you might get community members might get offended. Another thing also is we need to think about it. Some of the trafficker is actually in the community, and they could be the community leaders. So here we are. Because this is happening 25 years ago, I think. In Portland, they were so vulnerable, when we have all this trafficking law, and they went to set out an information, say, how we can have a meeting. They have law enforcement, everybody, and they went there. And you know what happened? The community got offended, they were so mad, they were so upset. So after that, they got death threats. And so they have to close their office for safety. And then they called me and said, hey, Emma, this is happening to us, what can we do? What can we tell her? So I said, no, before you go to the community, you need to figure out who in the community that you can work with. You have to respect them. You need to develop the trust relationship so that they can help you. If you go there with this attitude, the chances is they're going to close the door on you, and you might not be able to go to the community and provide the most important critical information that the community needs to make sure that we can protect them. Or at least be able to know what's the rights, what's the services that's available, how to identify the victim, how to identify the trafficker. Basic information that this is big because then they might be able to know who is who. I know that also when we do policy, we're always thinking about it has to be focused on the victim service. I think a lot of policy, become, as you said, is really advanced because we never thought about what are the things that the victim really needs. We just assume that we know it as a provider, but also someone creating the policy itself. So it's, for me, it's so critical and important that we need to make sure that we have survivor on the table, ask them what do they need, because sometimes we just assume. Shelter, I know we'll talk about it. Sometimes we experience it in the past that we don't have a shelter specific for human trafficking. I don't know if we have.
No, we don't.
No. And so what we do, we send them to our domestic violence shelter. And they have a different requirement. The other thing also is when you work with a human trafficking victim, it takes a long time. It's not 3 months, not 6 months, years. And so when we were doing this, we were really struggling early on to really figure out. And then the domestic violence shelter complaining because the funding that they have supposed to be for the victim of domestic violence, and they were being taken away for the human trafficking. And then the condition is also different. And so those are things that we see in the past. And so we try to advocate for really making sure the policy can be changed, and including human trafficking, that the requirement has to be in there to make sure that we don't, take away funding or resources for certain things. And so a lot of the daily shelter in the past, we don't allow victims of human trafficking to be in their shelter because they know that. And also, it's not safe for the victim of human trafficking to be in there too. So I think those are just some of the things that I want to share. There's more.
Thank you, Emma.
We do have one shelter. We have one, we have Rest, and it has 7 beds for the entire area. 7 beds.
Thank you for naming that. We know that there are a few shelters available. The thing is, when we talk about trauma-informed and client-centered, survivors should get to name where and what kind of housing environment or what kind of housing condition they want to live in. I've been working with survivors for 16 years, and the majority of the survivors who share with me is that if they can get to go and find their own housing, and what we should do is to fight for unrestricted fund to just pay for their rent, so that we don't, require them to go to a particular location where we already pre-designed The program we already pre-designed that not necessarily fit with the majority of the people that we encounter. Majority of them that we encounter is foreign born who are not very familiar with the group setting, or they've been in the trafficking situation in a group setting for so long that it became very traumatized for them. To again, after getting out and required to be in another group setting with rule and regulation and curfew and all of that, it's just another kind of controlling and trafficking environment to them. So in the past few years, we are very grateful for the state of Washington to provide more unrestricted funds for rental assistance. And I see that working very well with the majority of the survivors that we are serving. I want to go back to what Senator Rebecca mentioned earlier about the private entity who do trafficking. At API China, we encounter so many labor trafficking cases who being trafficked by either private remodeling, home remodeling, construction, restaurant owner, home care, in a very small business, sometimes even under the table, not even registered with the labor department. A lot of them also for domestic servitude, for instance, just private people like normal homeowner, they go to another country recruiting and bringing people to their home to do babysitting and house chores and all of that. Those are very difficult to investigate in general, or it's very difficult for us as organizers or to go out and educate because they are very isolated with like language barrier that Emma mentioned earlier. I want to ask the experts here, what is your recommendation about the kind of regulation or policy or the kind of response that community or service providers should do to eliminate that?
Eliminate.
Or reduce?
Well, I think that's been one of the reasons why we exist in doing this, this work, is to really eliminate, that gender-based violence, But I think it's easy to say than done. We have, to me, it's like we have to work together, all of us. We need to, from the top to the bottom, legislature, court, judges, and NGO, churches, and individual. Because, as I said, one of the things that we do is we go to the community and provide education awareness, and with that itself helps. And when we're talking about prevention, we always, we don't think that community education, community organizing is part of prevention. And so we need to make sure that it's one of the, funding. The funding we need to put in. And this is really a difficult one because all the fundings that we have is very specific. But I know City of Seattle, they started it 7 years ago because they asked me to do this. What it is basically, I want you to do this, it's a pilot project, and they told me I have a certain amount of money and work with 5 different communities, 5. But then I said, well, what is the condition? And I said, the problem that we have is funders always tell you how to do it and what kind of outcome they need. And so I said, if you want to give me the money, I don't want you to tell me how to do it. We'll do the work, but allow us to do it because I want to make sure that every community that I work with, they can put in a more culturally appropriate. Something that worked for Native American may not work for the Filipino. And so we want to make sure that we have that. And so if we are trying to help eliminate this, we need to be mindful. How do we communicate? Funders, community, everybody that needs to be on the table. And so collaboration, partnership, everything also. I have issues, problem with collaboration. When we think about collaboration, what do you think? Oh, I want to collaborate with you. But at the end of the day, you take the credit, and the people in the community lost everything. So I don't, recommend collaboration. I always say that. And it has to be a partnership. You have to partner with them because that's the only way that you can empower them. We have to empower community, everybody. They need to own it. We need to respect that. You're there, you just have to support them. I think businesses, name it all. I mean, they have responsibility to do everything that we can, but we need to partner. We need to be in the same page. We need to work together. I think.
Well, I see our people that are in the very back, tabling, I see Bess here, right? And I think part of it is peer-to-peer, right? That's how you need change, right? So Bess is one of the organizations that I think that comes from a business perspective, right? And how do businesses take ownership up front? I know our courts, are doing that piece in terms of education. So I do think in the hospitality industry, right, this is not something we want to be known for. And at the same time, I think, the gap of information that I have, right, is in work that seems vulnerable, right, and better understanding the demographics of the work population, bringing people up to light without making them feel like that they are going to be the ones that are going to be persecuted. So I'm thinking about bikini baristas, I'm thinking about massage parlors, thinking about adult entertainers, thinking about people that are, doing work that has a market. And that so often, even though we've been changing laws, and just this last year, we changed the law to make it easier to prosecute the traffickers. But at the same time, if it's not done correctly and implemented with the people who are at the table, and often when we're passing laws, the sufficient resources aren't there to be able to implement on day one, and so that's often where the harm happens. Because I'll give an example where we have finally included agricultural workers in overtime pay, and so now they are covered. Before you could work as many hours and you just get straight pay. And so we changed that law, but the workers themselves were brought in by their contractors and their farmers to march in Olympia last year to say, we don't want overtime. We want to just have hours. They marched around using Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta messaging and the way that we have organized the pressure, asking for us to reverse that law and let them go back to straight pay. And because the employer community has cut their hours. And one of our Filipino-owned businesses, he's going under because, he's so used to his whole business model is based on straight pay for workers, and he could not, he couldn't adjust quick enough. So it's this challenge where this has been the status quo, and changing the status quo to say, no, we can do better, is a challenge if we don't figure out how do we do the implementation, how do we do the transition to have a just transition. And so I think that's the place where there's a gap, but I think there's also the opportunity, right? Is we have put into place environmental justice into statute. We have said that we're going to start to hold new polluters and corporate folks accountable, and we're going to use that revenue to be able to invest in. The other thing that I mentioned earlier, that I wanted to mention earlier, it does have a thread of connection, and I think about root causes and how do we actually change the dynamic. One piece of legislation that I am really proud about is the fact that we created a Fair Start for Kids. And what this is about to make sure low-wage care providers, how are we starting to actually pay them what it actually costs? So every year, over the last couple of years, hopefully, on the ballot in November, we protect this. by voting no on those initiatives. Because we were paying 85% of what it actually costs to provide childcare. And some are like, y'all can figure out how to pay the rest of it. But these are our most vulnerable people, our children and the providers that are providing this care for them, and their parents that are depending on this to be able to work. So now at 87%, I believe, and then we have a plan to get to fully funding. And so I think that piece of like making sure our children are cared for and provide safe places, right? Because we know that trafficked individuals, usually because they had other pieces, other traumas and exposures when they were younger. And so building more resiliency into it so that people will say no to these choices and be able to defend and protect themselves.
Thank you. I know that I want to leave some time for the audience to ask questions, but I want to give Caroline an opportunity to respond to the question about all the barriers, including jurisdiction and the barrier that the Native community are facing. What kind of recommendation that you have to the state or federal to improve the protection for Native women or Native people in general to avoid trafficking?
There's, on a national level, there's not a lot of data on victimization for Native women. A lot of our organizations don't even collect. When you do your intake, do you have a box for Native American? Some of our states don't. Maybe Vermont is a state that doesn't collect Native American data, but are we looking at that? We need data, we need to understand and get some kind of picture of how they're being groomed and recruited, how they're being, just the whole cycle. Where are they being taken to and from? Are they recruited on reservation, off reservation? There's just not a lot of data on that. We also need to know, the high rates of missing and murdered indigenous women and people. Many of them, when we're doing outreach, we're finding them in encampments. We're finding them, sometimes they're in receiving medical care, and so they're receiving because of confidentiality. But when we're addressing NMIW, we have to look at human trafficking because we know the connection between domestic violence and trafficking and domestic violence and missing and trafficking and high rates of homicide and just lethality when folks are in life. But there was a study that I was looking at last week that said that for prostituted women, over 85% of prostituted women deaths were homicide. And the rate of being a victim of homicide, if you're in the life, was, and my language comes out of that report, sorry. The rate of being targeted, the increase in lethality or death rate was increased by over 120% if you are a prostituted woman, you have over 120% higher rate of being victim of homicide. Which that's terrifying. But when you're in the life for our trafficking survivors, they call them the missing. Because often there have been components in their life leading up to this that have made their families extra concerned. Like this has been a greatest fear, but they've also been active, in active addiction, and they've been homeless, and they're struggling with untreated mental illness, and their family, they've kind of lost contact, and their family has just lost contact. They don't know that they're missing, and nobody's looking for them, and so they're the missing. How many of our unidentified people are potentially folks who were in their life who have been trafficked? And then another is investing in the healing services, healing and support services for perpetrators. We're going to keep having to provide direct services if we're not going to get ahead of it and provide healing services to our primary perpetrators. Healing services for our men and boys. And accountability.
Right, right. That is a huge gap, not just in the native, but in the general community as well. We don't have a lot of resources for puppetry there. Thank you so much for giving us a lot of good insight about all of these issues. I want to open up to the audience to see if you have any questions for our panelists today.
Okay, thank you all, first of all. Although I do work in direct service, I think that we all are always learning, so I've learned so much from you all today. A lot has been going through my mind as you all have been talking, especially as I've been doing activism outside of work, about policies being made without the directly impacted folks at the table, kind of making that policy change language or advocacy with the folks who have the power, quote unquote. And what's concerning sometimes to me is when we talk about community, not all of our community should be speaking for us. And a lot of times, right, like there's like self-appointed leaders or self-appointed experts that actually are not. And so I'm constantly struggling with when you're trying to respect the community, but everyone has different ideas of how you should approach them, how you should talk about them. It makes me think a lot about, sorry, and I'll get to my question in a second. Makes me think a lot about, you know, as someone who's the granddaughter of immigrants, this idea that if you just work hard enough, you'll get to the American dream. But then there's this other idea where it's like, no, the cards are stacked against us. And then everyone else falls in the middle in that spectrum. And so I guess my question is like, how do we go to our communities and all get to that same baseline of understanding and ensure that the people who are at the table to create the change are working from that baseline? Does my question make sense?
Yes. I can understand what you're concerned because it's happening. You know, in the community, that's why I said, you don't go there with your own agenda. You need to figure out who in the community that you can work with. And yeah, sometimes you get both people that have attitude, you know, become leaders, or they don't believe, or they are abusive. And so it takes time, gotta be patient. You cannot expect once you go in there today, you'll get the answer that you need. I've been doing this work for the last 45 years as a community organizer. And everywhere I go, every community that I go, I have to all figure out first, what this community, you need to learn their culture, the understanding they need. Because, as I said, some of the community that I work with, they have bad, you know, experience here in the law enforcement, but also back home. A lot of times, law enforcement is also part of the trafficker. So they don't trust anyone. Some of them, they are victim of war. So they don't trust anyone, especially people who work in the government. And so even for us, when we were responding, you know, what we do, when there's a call for survival, call for human trafficking, the law enforcement, they don't go by themselves. They will call API China and say, hey, you know, how can you come to us? Because they want to make sure that, you know, the victim will not be afraid. And we also require or request the law enforcement not to be in the uniform. Okay. And so it takes a while. I mean, it's not easy, but if we really want to make that commitment and make a difference, we need to understand first the community that we want it to go.
Thank you, Sabrina, for a great question. Is there any other question?
Yeah, mine's up for.
I love your recommendation on helping to get funders to help out us as NGOs and as organizations that want to do this work, and thank you, Emma, not collaboratively, but as partners. How, I feel like funders have this kind of, it's almost like a Hunger Games for funding. So we almost get pitted against each other to do the same good work. So how do we get funders to actually reward partnerships rather than pit us against each other? Because we see it here, we want to work together, but how do we high up get funders to actually recommend that we partner together rather than pit us against each other? I'm not sure how to do that, but I would love any advice that you have.
Well, I'm just going to speak from my experience working with funders. And some of the funders, they know, when they see my face, they always say, oh, program leader. But I think, and I always say to them, why do you throw this fire on us and let us fight for it? When in fact, you as a funder should be able to say, okay, designate a certain amount for certain people or community. And again, if you are not at the table, your needs or community will not get that. So I think what we need to do is really to develop this kind of relationship with the funders. Sometimes we don't want to do it because, you know, there's a lot of red tape or whatever. But I feel that if we start developing that kind of relationship to them, it is better because they will understand what your needs, what other needs. And again, when you do that, don't just advocate for yourself. Advocate for all the community that needed it. Sometimes we're so selfish. We only want for ourselves. But I think, and I don't know if I'm making sense, but to me, it's like, that's what I've been doing, is really to figure out how can we get this funding. And again, I think the other thing also is we need to tell the funders, give us the money, let us do the work. Don't give us the requirement. For as long as at the end of the day, we will be able to give you what you need. Did I answer it?
Go ahead and ask.
Okay.
So there is an organization called WAYS, Washington Against Sexual Exploitation, and it's a group of us that are survivor leaders. And so we do really work on this, the question of legislation and how to respond. So just know that that's out there. But we are all volunteers, so it's kind of hard to have a day job and then still put a lot of effort into legislation, you know, when you have to basically meet on your lunch break and, you know, all that. Recently there was the whole thing about the soap zones returning, because as a response to Aurora, you know, businesses were up in arms. And we know that historically soap and soda were, soap stands for stay out of areas of prostitution. We know that those were usually areas that were oftentimes disproportionately areas where people of color live, disproportionately areas that already had barriers regarding crime, disproportionately areas where police, you know, policing was a big part of it. So it was kind of a throwback from the 90s, but it ended up, in many cases, creating harm. So I'm wondering, I know that one thing that had came out during the pandemic was the model of the crisis care centers, and there's supposed to be these 10 crisis care centers opening up. I know one of them is supposed to be allocated to youth. It would be wonderful if there was some kind of specific trafficking advocate at those centers so that we could do a little prevention and a little bit of, you know, being able to refer folks to services. And then the second thing, which this is kind of a question, for dancers, entertainers, there's a license that we used to have. And the license, when I was involved, it was like $120. It's probably $300 now. I have no idea. What happens to the funds from that, and can it go back towards survivors? Does it just go to the city? Do you know if that licensure money is able to be used?
Yeah. So, and I think Blaze is looking for other people that want to get involved with them, so that they have more capacity, so if you're interested. I think it is great, first of all, just to your other point, in terms of as we are fighting to build these crisis care centers, King County is taking leadership in getting some of the first ones out the door. And as they get built, I think that's exactly right. How do you place the right advocates and resources there so that they're getting the highest touch in those first 23 hours as possible before they go on to the next phases. And so, happy to, hopefully they're already doing that, but I'm sure that as that would be something to continue. For the adult entertainers, so in this particular workforce, they do have a license, and the first time that I had an opportunity to work with this workforce and this community is that they wanted to build in more education and knowing the rights curriculum, and wanted to change, like when people get that license, how to be upfront about giving them information about what their rights are, about trafficking, about education, so that they can feel empowered and have a little bit more say. Because a lot of people get into this field because they feel like there's no other job that they can do, right? And so that was the first thing. And so my understanding of the Department of Licensing, and the fee is, I don't know the amount right now, it is a very small population. There is only, I think at this point, 9 entertainment clubs in the state of Washington. So when we do the fees, it is to pay for the basic administration of doing the education and thing.
Okay.
And at least on that one, I have a feeling that the income is less than what it actually costs to run it.
Okay.
And that is the case for midwives, that is the case for, for a few of them where our state actually kind of subsidized. On some of them, if it was a bigger licensing fee, for instance, if there was an expansion rate, that would be definitely something to consider.
Our next question here in the back, please.
We have another
Yeah,
question here
one.
first. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
She going me?
Wanna go?
Should I go?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good day, everyone. I'm Tanya Yasu. I'm a former Seattle Police Commissioner, and I did a lot of things in the domestic violence realm. And I'm glad to be here. Marta, y'all probably might know her. She sent me a message, so say hello. I'm not a commissioner anymore, but I still have to be in the community, uniform, share information. I'm amazed at all of this information. I was on the commission for about 5 years and I knew nothing of all of these things. It's great to get. I feel like there's two sides of coins, or one thing that's multifaceted that hasn't been really just said, and it's kind of said, trafficking that is really like slavery. And it's sometimes like, why are we kind of sugarcoating slavery? I think that's what helps keep it away from the community, because they kind of don't understand trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking. It's kind of not connected, I think, in people's minds that's not in it. And then I also feel like we're looking at these boogeymen that are coming in and doing these things. I've been seeing a lot of YouTube videos lately where victims are talking about how it was their actual parents and their family members and things like that. So it's like we're looking for these boogeymen, we're calling it something that it's not. And I think if we could kind of come to a consensus and really put what the real thing is in the face of not only the legislatures and just the public in general, the real people, because we see it but we don't see it. You know what I mean? You drive down the street, you see the girl on the side of the road, and if you're not in this work, you're not necessarily stopping to do anything to help them, but so-called regular people, this is that part of town, I'm just gonna go out and see it out in the park, not understanding that that's a slave, that person's enslaved more than likely, and even if it's not from another person, it's probably drugs or just all the things. So I think if we could have more of these sessions or find a way that everybody come together and I think the next session is going to be talking about marketing and social media and stuff like that. The message isn't hitting people, where they're at. It's kind of going over their head. So that's my question, is why aren't we calling these things what they are? Why aren't we calling out the people that we should be calling out? And yes, why aren't we working together? We should come together and just go after these grants. I was not off earlier because I was up all night writing a grant that I had tried to get people to come and work with me. It was for $100 million. And I couldn't get people to come help me write this grant. And it was too sad. So I ended up just having to go for it all by myself. So it's on us to break down barriers, email, call, get together, and do this work. I don't know if that's a question, but.
Well, you said it, that.
Anybody want to take that?
Paula said it is.
No? Maybe I could just do a quick response to the term slavery, because we want to go away from something that is so dramatic, so that either the community or survivor themselves can relate to. The term slavery makes people think about shame, lock up, control, but a lot of survivors that we encounter are not in that situation. They can be somebody who just like us, sitting right next to us in the same classroom, in the same room, but being manipulated or being exploited at work or at, in the home. They don't call themselves a slave, but when we say that, have you been exploited or have you been forced to do this or do that against your will, they say yes. But if we ask, are you a slave or did they enslave you? Most of the time they will say no. So we want to move away from something very restricted so that people can recognize more, like a broader form of exploitation. I don't know if that covered, but I want the panelists to also add to that.
Well, just one more thing. Okay.
Well, to that, I would have to quote Harriet Tubman, who said she did free hundreds of people, but she could have freed thousands if they knew they were slaves.
So it should, sorry. I guess that's it. You got it. And that's what.
Okay, we do have a few in the back that are being missed.
Yeah, they don't even know.
I'm going to make a comment and I hope it comes out like a question. Good afternoon, my name is Marty Ray Ramsey. I'm the sexual assault case manager for Mother Nation. I work in North King County, clear up to Whatcom County, and I'm very grateful to be here today. And one thing I will tell you in my experience that's just over probably about 20 years in this field, my specialty is in human trafficking. The difference in Mother Nation in compared to other organizations is we do direct service mobile advocacy. That means I'm not sitting behind a desk waiting for somebody to come to me. I'm literally out there really hand in hand with family members extracting people, right? Not a very easy job. And what coronavirus has taught me in this type of work is what we talk about is we talk about the survivors and how best to serve them in a client-led environment. We talk about our funders and how we're all, napping after all these different funds. And what I've realized here is there's help and there's the appearance of help. And I'm on my last nerve here, really, because it's really frustrating because the only people I do not have issue with is the people and the families that I'm serving and helping. There's organizations and people that come together and say, yeah, we all have the common goal. And fortunately, just now in my 5th year in this region, originally my people come from the Columbia River, but my reservation is in Central Oregon. I'm from the Warm Springs Nation. But what we agree as Indigenous people, number one, we all agree that this is the number one worst problem that it has been since point of contact. Number two, that this Seattle region is the worst area for it in the entire nation. And I shared with Carolyn before I got here. Right over here near Discovery Park, we had the Seafair powwow. And I sat there and I stood because I have respect, and my grandmother taught me that. But Carolyn and another community leader in our Indigenous community, Roxanne White, got together and did a blanket dance to ask for funds to come towards their grassroots work. They are two of the most pivotal, most effective people who are leading groups of other people that are making a real tangible difference in this region. And they are going about doing a blanket dance, trying to get funding. So tell me about picking and fighting over funds. Fortunately, in my 4th year here, I've been able to establish relationship. It's only been with other Native gender-based violence programs. Because what I told my supervisor is it's about damn time we admit that there is no one organization that can do this or respond by themselves. You are really prideful if you really think so. I don't care if a person needs your help for 1 hour or 2 years. You're really prideful if you think so. Fortunately, because of relationship building, like you just described, I'm able to call other agencies and they don't sit there and question me. Oh, well, how does this person meet, these basis criteria? Sometimes I feel like the help, what I call the appearance of help, it's there, but it rules you out so you can't even access it. And that's a barrier to our people in our community. When you have people who are effective and they're doing the work and they're, getting breadcrumbs, and then the other bigger organizations, and they're sitting behind a desk hoping that trafficking survivor will actually survive to make it to them to get the resource or the access. This is what I will say I've heard as a common thread since I got here today, that term, the American dream. But every one of these communities that each one of you represent, and whatever nation you come from, whether you're immigrant, refugee, whatever brought you here, our Indigenous people are still fighting that same fight that each and every one of you are. It is no different. For me personally, I call this spirit work. There's a spirit of rage and a spirit of lust that this country is built on. You want to talk about core things? Let's talk about that. There's a consuming that is the common denominator between everything I hear being talked about here and all the different forms of trafficking. And that consumer keeps wanting to consume. So while we come here in the name of an American dream, how ironic that we're in this building right here that was created for our Indigenous people. And it's an honor to live here. And the second fold of that, and this is the part nobody likes to hear, you do not pay us advocates a living wage to live in this region to do this work. You do not. This is something that every one of us in this room can do something about. I don't want you to jump in a car with me and go run around with the family and get chased around by a pimp and out of Spokane. I don't need you to do all that. Creator put me here to do that work. But I'm a widow, I'm a mother of 3, and I cannot afford to live here, and I'm seriously contemplating leaving. So when coronavirus happened, my colleague and I were walking into situations right here in King County where 6 and 7 Seattle Police Department officers were walking out, throwing up their hands saying, we don't know what to do. We can't do nothing. And here's 2 Indigenous women with our executive director on the phone so she can be a witness in some of the most horrific conditions you could imagine, because it got way worse when coronavirus happened and everybody went inside. You do not pay us a living wage to live here, to support our children. I have just enough income to come and do this job wholeheartedly and go straight home. I don't have a life outside of that because guess what? It costs too damn much to live here. But I can go to a powwow and they can give out $100,000 for the best dancer in a competition. So this is directed first at my indigenous people, my indigenous communities. But it is also directed at everyone else that takes up this land of the Duwamish, of the Muckleshoot, of the Puyallup. If you want to see your communities change, why don't you jump in and come visit some of the reservations and help us. And then we're going to turn around and help you. Because what I love about Mother Nation, we may have a focus on indigenous people, but we help everybody. I help everybody. Everybody. And it's so word of mouth that we've expanded up to Snohomish County. I haven't even had to do outreach. It's literally, go call Marty. Go call Marty. She'll help you. She'll get it done. Go call Marty. You know? So yeah, I'm a little worked up. That probably wasn't a question, but seriously, let's get to the real thing.
I'm so sorry that we don't have time and have you all to join me to thanks all the wonderful donors today. Thank you so much for your time today.